Hello, Garland Nixon here. Ukraine has made some gains in eastern Ukraine. I guess that makes sense. And Europe is still on track for a managed economic meltdown. Let's talk. Hello, Garland here. And well, for starters, it's the opening day for American football season here in the U.S. So I'm going to try to get this thing done before one, which is kickoff time for most people. And if you know anything about football in America, it's like a religion for some people. At any rate, kind of like not as much as football, the real football for the rest of the world. I guess I should say that. All right, so let's start. Let's get right to it. Um, I hear something I find interesting. A while back, I had Scott Ritter on. Oh, Scott got pummeled mercilessly for what? Scott Ritter said, look, the NATO's pumping a lot of money and weapons into Ukraine. They're, doing everything they can to, build up Ukraine. It will have an effect. Ukraine will get some victories. But Scott said Russia will win the war, but it will have an effect. And he was lambasted for that. He was attacked. And I understand why. I understand that there is a certain level of emotion here for a lot of people in the world. There are people who look at this as an existential battle between good and evil on all sides. There are those on the NATO side who have been, in my humble opinion, not that my opinion is ever humble if I'm quite honest, but in my opinion, there are those on the NATO side who have been thoroughly drenched in propaganda to believe that Russia's evil and this is an unprovoked attack and therefore you must stop evil and on the side of democracy. Let's see, Putin's doing this, A, to reconstitute the Soviet Union, B, because he's just evil and he hates democracy, and a country that the United States overthrew and put in a compliant anti-Russian government, and a country that has outlawed all TV stations, radio stations, media, and political parties that oppose the one in power. That is a powerful democracy on the border of Russia. And Putin, you know how he hates democracy. For God's sake, the number one thing he doesn't like is democracy. So he's only doing that because he wants democracy. Oops. I mean, he's only doing that because he hates the Soviet Union. Oops. I mean, it was totally unprovoked. There's no reason that he's doing it. So if you're completely drenched and basted and cooked and baked in propaganda, then you have any number of reasons that you've been handed by the propaganda machine to believe that Russia must be stopped because of the Manichaean belief that we are in a universe in which pure evil is in a battle with pure good, and you're on the side of pure good. Have you ever noticed this though? Before I go any further, I got to say this. I've always said this. I try to be self-aware. That's what I want to be, self-aware. And I've recognized that every person that I've ever met, with the exception of the devil worshippers, but that's a whole nother story. Every person that I've ever met believes, who believes that there is an existential battle between good and evil, always believes they're on the side of good. I have yet to run into a person that says, well, of course, this is a battle between good and evil, and I'm on the side of evil. That's a clue that it's bullshit, that things are much more nuanced than that. So there are those of us like me, I live in the United States, which should, if you live in the United States, you really should understand what the US is about instead of just being drenched in propaganda and say we're the good guys and they're the bad guys. But being in the United States, I understand what's going on. I understand the US is an empire. I understand that as an empire, the problem that the US is really running into now is the contradiction between empire and democracy, wherein you can have an empire that is a monarchy or a dictatorship, or you can have a democracy, but you can't have both. And right now, that is a contradiction that's happening, and it's manifesting itself in the form of the United States trying to overthrow, trying to overpower Russia and China and Iran and any other rising powers. And therefore, if you were to argue that this was an existential argument, a battle between good and evil, it would be hard to say that the country, that the entity, that the empire is fighting to control the world and use coercive and violent power to continue what they believe is their rule in the world, ruling the world. It would be very difficult to take the position that that is the good side. So instead, I think it's wiser to evaluate this thing and, take a position on from a worldwide perspective of what's in the best interest. And think about this: what's in the best interest of the majority of the people in the world. That's where I come in. At any rate, so on we go. So what has happened here? So Scott Ritter a while back came on and said it's going to have an effect. They're giving a lot of money and weapons, but Russia's going to still win the war. That's what he said, right? What was implied by Scott Ritter, who I'm going to have on Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock, starting this week, hopefully every Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock on my Rockman channel. But at any rate, I move forward. So basically, it wasn't an unreasonable position. It was, look, you're pouring a lot of money in. I'm not saying that the Ukrainians are going to win the war, but I'm saying so many resources are being given to them. They will have some success, but it ain't going to be enough to win it all, right? Now, on the other side, there were people who wanted Russia to win all throughout the world, South America, Africa, if we're honest, Middle East, South America, Africa. I'm just going to be frank with you. If you go around the world, the brown and red and black countries that have been treated like crap by the empire for many, many years. And historically, if we're honest, this is hard to dispute. The Russia, the Soviet Union, that culture has a history of siding with the powers that were oppressed. You can like or dislike the Soviet Union or whatever, but when you look at history and you look at the revolutionary movements that were fighting against the U.S. empire and fighting against oppression in um, in South America and in Africa, etc. The Soviet Union was on their side. Russia, if you look at it now, tends to be Russia, China tends to be pushing. And you can argue whatever reason that it's selfish or non-selfish, it doesn't matter. It results to the same, right? So there are a lot of people in this world who are looking at it saying, I think it would be better for the parts of the world, the global South that have been oppressed for many, many years, if they have the option of doing business with Russia or China or the US based on their option, not based on the coercion of the US and its affiliates. Based on, you ask yourself, how does France have all of this gold? How do they have all these vaults of gold and no gold mine? Because they stole it all from Africa. You see, on and on and on. The UK and the US went to overthrow Bolivia, and they did overthrow the Bolivian government. The Bolivian government was able to regain power with Evo Morales, but they overthrew through Bolivia because they wanted their resources. They wanted their lithium for batteries, right? So if you look at all of that, you can take a position on who you want, but I think it's a nuanced position. One like me could look at it and say, I believe that it's better for the powers, for the countries that have been oppressed by the colonial powers. Quite frankly, to be quite honest, I don't want to see NATO win and continue to be able to use these kind of coercive powers against countries that are unable to defend themselves for the most part. So at any rate, I don't think it's the best interest of the world as a mass, as a whole. People should be able to make their own decisions. If a country wants to be whatever it wants to be, that's fine. If it wants to be a communist or socialist or capitalist or neoliberal, as long as it's their decision, Garland Nixon says countries should chart their own direction. Okay. So that's where my positions on this come. And just purely from a perspective of who started it. You go overthrow the government of a country on Russia's border and start pumping weapons into that country, you're asking for trouble. I don't think it's a healthy, positive thing to do. I think you should lose. Well, excuse me, the U.S. technically isn't in it. So I'm not saying the U.S. should lose. I think Russia has a right to defend their border. I can defend that ground. So at any rate, right now, there's weeping of gnashing of teeth in the camp that says we would prefer that Russia is able, personally, let me go one further. I would prefer that Russia put forward a series of demands for security on their border. And the demand was, look, our security, your security, it should be indivisible. Nobody should be in better shape. And I think that in seeing what's happening with Russia, in seeing and Europe and Ukraine, and seeing it through the lens of what's happening in Taiwan and China, and not arbitrarily separating those things and saying that's all one. What's happening between the United States and Iran, the United States and Russia, the United States as China. I'm not going to divide those. That's U.S. foreign policy. It's unhealthy for the world. It's not in the best interest of the world. And I want to see the United States have to back down off of that perch and have to accept the fact that they don't run the world anymore. This is a multipolar world. They're pushing against multipolarity. I'm in favor of multipolarity. Okay. Now, what I'm not going to do, I remember years ago, I had a girlfriend, and her cousin, sister, friend, I don't remember what the hell, was dating this guy who was boxing, who was into boxing. And we went to, needless to say, to see the boxing match. And watching it, I've never met the guy before, and the guy's out there, and he's, his opponent was tough, but he's, seemed to be winning. He was quicker. The other guy seemed bigger and stronger, but he was quicker. He's getting in a lot of punches. He's scoring. Blah. I've never been into boxing that much. No, self-defense, but not boxing. But at any rate, so at some point the guy's getting in punches and we're clapping, and she's yay, and getting in punches, clapping, yay. The other guy was bigger and stronger, and at some point he made an error. And you know how it is, if you know anything about self-defense, you make an error, you swing and you miss. The worst thing you can do is swing, because if you miss, you know what I mean? Think about it. Your hands are up, right? You ideally, when you punch, you want to get it back in a hurry, right? If you would throw let's say you throw an open hand, boom. But what the first thing you're taught is get it back. Boom, get it back. Why? Because if your hand's out and somebody grabs it, boom, they got you. They get your hand, they can break your arm, they can twist your wrist, you're done. If you throw that hand out and somebody gets it, right? So the idea being, the worst thing you can do is throw a punch and miss, or throw a kick and miss, because people are going to, if it doesn't land, it gives people an opportunity. If you don't get it back fast enough, things of that nature, somebody can really take a good move. And there are a lot of people who are really good in boxing at counter punching. There are a lot of people who are really good. They're going to wait for you to make a move. They want you to stick an arm or a leg out or something like that. So when you go to attack, they're going to tear your ass limb from limb. So here's my point. In a conflict, the fact that you threw a punch doesn't mean that you've won the conflict. I watched that fight. That guy fighting, he's throwing punches, he's doing this, he's doing that. He threw one and missed. And when that punch came out and it missed, look at this. Your arm's out here, right through here. If you miss, there's an opening. The ribs are under here. That arm is out there. They can go under it and get the ribs. They can pin it against that arm. Look, I can pin that arm against you. Oh, you're in a world of trouble now, can't you? If I can pin that arm against you. So the bottom line is this: when you throw a punch, you're extremely vulnerable, right? So when I look at this, and instead of saying, oh, Ukraine won an area, oh, Ukraine won a blah, blah, blah. First of all, here's the side of it. It exposes some weaknesses that Russia had. And what with Russia is, they took a lot of territory. They were able to push Ukraine back, but they left minimal forces to hold the territory. There's a difference between winning territory and holding territory. And we're going to get into that, because now that Ukraine has won territory, taken some back, not a lot, but they've taken some back. They've finally gotten something, right? Now that they've taken some territory back, they got to hold it. And as I said, I watched that guy, and when he threw that punch and he missed, he got knocked out. He was winning, but he threw that punch and he missed. And when he missed, it was a punch, not straight out. It was kind of a swipe at the jaw this way, kind of going sideways, and it missed, and his arm was out. And that punch came, that guy counter punched. He followed that punch, right? They call it following. You follow that punch to where it came from. That punch missed. He went right back into it. Pow! Right in the snoot. Bam! Flat knockout. So oftentimes, be wary when you're throwing a punch. You can get yourself beat to hell. You get knocked out with one punch. As I said, there are a lot of people in the self-defense who wait. They want you to throw the punch. Now, I don't subscribe to that. To me, there is certainly the advantage of surprise and a surprise attack and things like that. But it depends upon the circumstances, right? It all depends. My point being, now that Ukraine has thrown a heavy punch and taken some, as was predicted. I mean, it did, like I said, Scott Ritter said, yeah, they're going to get they're going to have this, it's going to have an effect. Throwing all this money and all these things in is going to have an effect, right? All these people rebuilding, reconstituting their army is going to have some effect. And everybody says, Scott, you're crazy. Why? Because they wanted to believe that this is just a one-sided blowout and Ukraine will never, ever have any success whatsoever. Well, it's a war. And there's going to be times when either side has some success at some point. So Ukraine has taken some areas. Now, first of all, they took extremely morbidly heavy losses to do this. So Ukraine, because it was so important to them, it's like this. They just ran right into artillery fire and machine gun nest, and so unthinkably heavy losses. Keep in mind something. They don't care about the losses. Why is that? Because this is not a war between Ukraine and Russia. It's between NATO and Russia, and Ukraine is proxies. They're cannon fodder. So when that's an advantage. That is an advantage, right? If I'm willing to take a bunch of punches, then I have an advantage. If those punches don't, knock me out, then I can get in closer maybe or whatever. If I'm willing to take some licks. So they go in, basically, and because NATO could give a shit if how many Ukrainians die, all of them, they could care less when they're finished with the Ukrainians. Look what they're doing to the Europeans. They don't care about the damn Ukrainians. They're sacrificing the Europeans centuries of lifestyle put together, albeit some of it from stolen resources, but whatever the case, they're sacrificing that. If the European allies, if they'll sacrifice their asses and throw them into the economic meat grinder, sure as hell they'll throw the Ukrainians into the meat grinder, into the real physical meat grinder. So they're like, look, we don't care how many Ukrainians we lose. We got a lot of them. We got more Ukrainians. We got young Ukrainian women. We can throw them. When we're done with the men, we'll just throw the women into they don't give a shit. And then they're eyeing the polls right now. The neocons are looking at the polls and they're like, how many people you got there in Poland? 9 million? If let's just throw, they're like looking at the polls. You guys got 9 million people or so in Poland, huh? Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that you were to lose 1 million of them. You got 8 million, and look, you got all these Ukrainian refugees and stuff like that. You'd still be okay with 8 million, wouldn't you? Yeah. So look, here's what we're going to do. We're going to take 1 million of you friggin' bastards, and we're going to throw their asses right into the meat grinder too. Sure, are you going to lose all your young males that you need to help build a society and father kids and all that stuff? Fair enough. But let's face it, if we're honest about it, Poland, your ass is going to be starving and frozen anyway. So either way, you lose them. Do they starve and freeze? Or do you throw them into the meat grinder against Russia? So the U.S. neocons are going to be eyeing Poland saying, you stupid sons of bitch. My dear friends and neighbors, we're going to take 1 million of your young men and throw their asses right into the meat grinder. So shut the hell up and do what you're told. And what do you think the Polish leaders will do? No, we're here for our people. I don't know if you've been paying much attention to Europe lately, but everybody in Europe, every last soul in Europe is now expendable. There is no faking anymore. There's no U.S. saying you're our friends and we're trying to look out for you anymore. All that illusion is gone. Now the U.S. is pretty simple and pretty clear. Every European is subject to be thrown into the meat grinder so we can get what we want. We started with the Ukrainians. The rest of you people, you get in the same. You may get a different iteration of it. You may get thrown to the meat grinder. You may get nuked. You may get starved. You may get frozen, whatever the case. That is your lot in life. Accept it. Peasants, accept it. That's where the U.S. is right now. They're not trying to hide it. They're like, hey, there's other world powers. As long as we could, we tried to maintain the illusion that you were our friends. Think about this. NATO is here to protect you and provide your security. Think of this contradiction. NATO is here to protect you and provide security. And we're going to starve and freeze your asses to death by the hundreds of thousands. Isn't there a contradiction there? So NATO is going to protect me from the Russians, but the U.S. is going to ensure that we die by the hundreds of thousands to protect us from the Russians. The gig is up. NATO ain't here to protect you from the Russians. It's here to keep the United States in charge of a world that it ain't in charge of anymore. It's all a fraud. So Europe, you going along with this, you got to be out of your freaking minds. Even your own leaders are like, fuck this democracy bullshit. Annalena Baerbock, they're like, hey, she was literally at a forum called Democracy in Danger. And at a forum called Democracy in Danger, she says, I don't give a damn about democracy. I don't care what the voters say. This is what we're doing. Democracy ain't in danger in Europe. It would have to be present to be in danger. It ain't in danger anymore. That, hey, Garland, I think there's a tiger that's the Bengal tigers are in danger of extinction, particularly the ones in your house. Yeah, but I don't have any Bengal tigers in my house. Yeah, but if you did, theoretically, in theory, they're everywhere. They're amongst us. They're part of the universe. We all are part of the universe. So therefore, Bengal tigers are in danger in your home. Yeah, right. Well, democracy is not good news, Europe. I got good news and I got bad news for Europe. The good news is democracy is not in danger. The bad news is it would have to be present to be in danger. Europe has to wake up, the European people, to that. All right, let's continue. So, Garland's assessment, again, as I always say, I'm not a military, as Alexander McCord says, I'm not a military expert. I'll say this, he's a hell of a lot more of a military expert than I am. For not to be a military expert, he sure does get this stuff right. But at any rate, but he's a researcher. Oh, that's right. Don't do your own research. Listen to what the government tells you. So, bottom line is this. Ukraine's thrown a punch, but they took some hellified losses. And I would make one argument. One of the specified goals of Russia's military option is demilitarization, right? Denazification, demilitarization. If they're taking heavy losses in a indirect way, right? In an indirect way, anytime Ukraine takes heavy losses, it is working towards the move of demilitarization. So, as Joe Enlai said when he was asked in the 1970s or 80s about the French Revolution, it's too early to tell. Talk to me about a month out, 4 to 6 weeks after a battle to see what happened. Remember, there was a time when they were like, yay, the Russians took Izium. It's all over. They're moving and they'll never be slowed up. And now, oh, the Russians lost. Oh, it lost Izium. Oh, it's over. Like, think about this. Like a team has 17 games in the NFL. And like you look at the season and there's 12 games into the season and they're 11-1. And you're like, they won 11 in a row, then they lose their 12th game. And you're like, well, what are they going to do? Fire the coach? They're going to have to get all new players, change. There's destruction. They're going to have to change everything. For God's sake, man, they just lost a game. Yeah, but they're 11-1. Yeah, but this fact is they lost a game. That's the way I see it. Russia's the equivalent of 11-1 in a 17-game series right now. They lost an area, and the other side, Ukraine, took unfathomable losses. And basically, what it showed is Ukraine, for a relatively minor gain, Ukraine is willing to take unthinkable losses, and they did. Now, here's the bad side of it. Here's the terrible side of it for Russia. The terrible side of it is not actually losing the turf per se, or a PR battle. The worst part of it for Russia is reality that Russia came to protect. One of the reasons they're doing that is because the Ukrainians were attacking Russian speakers in the Russian speaking area of Ukraine, ethnically Russian area. So now that Ukraine is going to have to come back into those areas, my understanding, and let me add this, my understanding of what happened here is that it wasn't that the Ukrainians attacked the Russians fought, they lost battles and were driven out. It is that there were large concentrations of Ukrainians that were able to head into these towns. And because of the size of them, the Russians, for the most part, just kind of backed away. They had no choice because the numbers were against them, and they didn't have all the things they needed to hold off the Ukrainians. So they withdrew from the towns. That it wasn't pitched battles and the Russians lost. They had to withdraw from these towns and reconstitute, right? The terrible part of it is for the Russians, not for the Russians, for the damn people in these towns, is that the Ukraine is run by a fascist neo-Nazi regime. And a neo-Nazi regime, let me say this, in the same way that if you're in the United States right now and you're a person who opposes the status quo, you're looking over your shoulder because you're the Brandon administration. If you saw the evil dark Brandon speech, they're looking at this like don't agree with us, and you could be far to the left of us, you could be a MAGA person far to the right of us, but you don't agree with us on some issues, and therefore we got their eye on you. Looking at you. That's right, you son of a bitch. The government's looking at you to take you down. And they're looking at your bank account, they're listening 24 hours a day. And if they get an opportunity, you're screwed, blued, and tattooed. In the same way that in the United States, if you're a person who's opposing the status quo, you got some concern. If you're in because the Biden team is a pretty, in my opinion, they're a fascist group. They're a pretty damn fascist group. So you're concerned, the ultra liberals, I call them, in the same way that people say the ultra nationalists in Ukraine are fascists. When you get the ultra liberals are fascists. It's just a different brand. It's the difference between strawberry, chocolate, and butter pecan fascism. There are various. Let me say this before I move on. When people say democracy, there's different types of democracy, right? Venezuela is a democracy. I've been there. I've been an election observer. It is a democracy. The damn people sure as hell vote, and they make a decision as to who's in charge. There's democracy here. Let me just say this. If you think the people vote in the United States and make a decision on people who are in charge, you, my friend, are naive. So there's different types of democracies, and there's different types of fascism, and there's different types of democratic orders and all those kinds of things, and different types of dictatorships and things of that nature, various different types of monarchies, all that stuff, right? So the bottom line is this. When you look at Ukraine, to me, it's the fascist model is one directly from 1930s Germany. That's the model of fascism that they have there. So therefore, the real tragedy and fear here is that the people who are running around, doing a bunch of Sieg Heilen and goose stepping and all the things that those people do, when they come to these towns, that they'll be looking for revenge on the people who are on the Russian speaking population. So the terrible part of this is that because the Russians were forced to withdraw from some of these areas, that the citizens, again, could be victims of their own government. They are technically Ukrainians and they want the hell out of Ukraine. And now it's going to remind them even more why the hell they got to get out of Ukraine, because the Ukrainians are going to come back and they're going to go door to door and they're going to search for people. And they're going to call people collaborators and torture and murder and all the terrible things that they're going to do to remind the Russians and remind the Ukrainians that they can't back down here. It's going to be a reminder to them. Look, these people are bad news. And if you walk away, this is what's going to happen to every last Russian-speaking person in Ukraine and anywhere else that these fascists get their hands on them. It is going to be a strong reminder. It is unfortunate that a whole lot of people are going to have to suffer. So that's the terrible part of it is to every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. So the reaction that the Yukis come in and are going to start the old, we got to figure out who's on Russia's side, and we've got to slaughter and murder and mistreat those who are not, even though they're Ukrainian citizens, those who are not along with us, is going to be a reminder as to how important it is for the people who believe they need to act militarily to protect the Ukrainian citizens. It'll be a reminder of how important it is to them. Somebody says Garland could talk underwater. Yeah, sometimes I feel like I'm talking underwater, but I got a lot to say, and I enjoy it. So thanks a lot, James. James H. So let's keep going. So I think that's what's going to happen in the long term. We can't get caught up to me and what happened today, yesterday, and arbitrarily like, okay, the Ukrainians had some wins, so therefore this means the world is over and the sky is falling. No, this is part of what happens, unfortunately, in a war. This is, I do think the other thing that this will do, the message to the it'll be a message to the Russians that they need to make some adjustments, that they need probably some more firepower on these. The other thing is this, that they need some more personnel. I think from all of that I've read, the Russians have left a lot of the ground fighting up to the militias. The militias, to be quite frank, there's a lot of very tough and good fighters, but I don't believe, from my understanding, that they are up to the level of the Russian regular forces. And I think the regular forces will become more engaged. I think that's needed. The tougher regular forces and the heavier armed and the heavier armored forces that Russia will become more engaged. They will launch. I'm already reading that they're launching. They're more engaging their aerospace forces more, and there'll be more bombings and more attacks. So I think I'll put it like this: gaining ground is one thing, holding it is another. And I think now that the Ukrainians have gained some areas, what they're going to have to do, two things. Number one, they're going to have to resupply those areas. Number two, they're going to have to hold off any attacks on those areas. And they're coming. There will be counteroffensives coming. So they've had success on their offensive. But again, like I said, like a punch, when I swing, my swing. See, I better one of two things. That offensive, right? I better get that thing back in here, right? Or I better not miss, because if I miss, there's all kind of exposure here. And as I said, some people, when you miss, they'll just pin it. They'll just take that and push it back against you, and you're screwed. But there's any number of things they can do. So they swung, and they hit, right? But now they're kind of holding on. Now they're clinched. They got these areas and they're holding on to these areas. What they could have done was went out and punched, hit the Russians, come back. I think part of this is the narrative, traditional narrative in war. Because remember something, the NATO people are running off narratives. They're running off narratives only. Traditional narrative in a war is take ground, take ground, take ground, take ground. And hey, we took 100 meters, we took 1,000 meters, we took 1,000 kilometers, whatever you took. Then you go home and you paste it all over the newspaper. We just took 500 kilometers. We've got a victory, right? But if your opponent is saying, I want to take ground, but I want to crush your army, then they'll attack your army, not necessarily as concerned with taking ground. Here, now, I'm not implying the Russians aren't concerned with taking ground here. They're not, because the Russians aren't looking at this as we want to take ground for a PR victory, or we want to take ground so that we can just get ground and hold it. They legitimately see this as there are people living in these areas. We have to occupy and protect these areas from Ukrainian military that will come in and will do terrible things to the citizens. So it is a loss for the Russians. It is a loss of a public relations loss. It is, but most importantly, if you understand how the Russians are looking at this, it's a loss in that it jeopardizes the people, the safety of the people that the Russians are intending on protecting. Now, what I'm reading is there are a lot of people, there's weeping and gnashing of teeth amongst the intelligentsia of Russia. They're angry, they're upset, and understanding. It's very emotional to them that Russia's finally lost and took a loss in an area, because they've been victory after victory after victory after victory after victory, town after town after town, area after area after area. Last I heard, Russia had taken 20 to 25% of Ukraine. So if Russia loses 3%, then now they only got 23% of Ukraine or 22% of Ukraine. Is that is that the end of the war? No, it isn't. But Russia doesn't expect to lose any, doesn't want to lose any. So now I think what we're going to see is Russia setting up for counteroffensives. I also think you'll see the Russia's aerospace forces more heavily engaged. I think one of the things that Russia has done, and I've been reading this and I believe this too, and it's funny because I was just saying this, and then I read it from people who are much more knowledgeable of this than me. And Russia has gone in kind of with one arm tied behind their back. They wouldn't destroy the infrastructure, things of that nature. They were muted on their attacks on a lot of things. I do think you're going to see Russia. I don't think they're going to change. everything and just go all out, and just let a few victories in an area that they don't like, that they're unhappy about, change their complete strategy. I don't think that there is everybody like they got to completely change their strategy. Well, if they were losing and they were going toe to toe and they were getting beat and they were getting routed and all this kind of stuff, yeah, okay, I think you change strategy. But you've been winning, 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 winning. You take a loss. Like there was two offensives. Harrison, I think in Harkov, there were two offensives. So you've been winning, winning, town after town after town, city after city. So what happens? So you take a beating in one area and you lose a bunch of areas you have to withdraw. The other offensive, they massacred it. The other offensive, so there was two offensives by Ukraine. One of them, the people got massacred, wiped out, chewed to pieces, right? It was a complete and total debacle. The other one, they had some success. The Russians withdrew from some towns, right? I don't think that you go and you completely um, reevaluate and change everything because in a war you finally lost. It had some losses. I think you maintain course and speed. I do think that what Russia will do is reevaluate some of the things they're doing to hold towns. I think they'll reevaluate some of the things they're doing to put the weight on some of the militias, and they'll get some of their, they've sent some of the Chechens in, and I remember the Chechens are tough bastards. They're ready to go into the fight at any time. I mean, it ain't going into to sing and dance. They're going into the fight. So the Chechens they brought them in. They brought some tough fighters in, and I think they're ready to go back and take this ground back. But I would suspect, because as I said, when you throw that punch and you're way out there, your fist is out there, but behind it there's an arm that can be attacked, right? It's that arm is still attached to the body. Well, these troops that have gone, stuck their neck out and taken these towns, they're still attached to the body, to the main Ukraine, in the form of supply lines. The fist is the troops. It's way out there, and the fist is struck and attacked, but it still has the arm, the supply lines going back to the main body in Western Ukraine, which says now that the Ukrainians have those towns, they got to hold them and they got to maintain supply lines. Well, Russia has um, air superiority. So those supply, I'll put it like this. I wouldn't want to be driving a truck full of supplies heading towards any of these places on the front, because it ain't going to be a pleasant time for you. You'll be lucky to get there in one piece. Okay, so they are now, Ukrainian forces are extended. They're trying to build. I think the Russians are going to, any concentrations of troops will be targeted and attacked, and we'll see what happens. But a lot of people expected the Russians to just continue to roll. Well, they did a lot of rolling. They've run into a speed bump, as happens in wars. We'll talk about it in a couple weeks. Wednesday morning, I'll have Scott Ritter, and we'll at 9 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and we'll chat about that. We'll get his thoughts, and we'll go from there. But so that's my thoughts on it. Those are my thoughts on it. Ukraine excuse me, forget Ukraine. Ukraine ain't involved. Ukraine always loses. NATO sacrificed the hell out of thousands and thousands of Ukrainian lives in order to get a PR victory, in order to take some towns, get some turf. They got some towns, they got some turfs. They lost a hell of a lot of Ukrainians, and now they got to hold them and maintain supply lines. Best of damn luck with that. And now the Russians get to look at it. I mean, when you go out and you get in a fight with some guy and he beats you, you go back and you're saying, I need to re-up my skills. I need to work on some things that I wasn't able to do. You don't go home and say, well, I've lost. Particularly when you've been winning, when you're 11-1, you lose your 12th game. You don't say, well, the season's over. You say, well, we got to make some adjustments for losing one game, but I won the first 11. Some of the things I got to keep doing, some of the things I got to fix. People have determined some holes in my swing. Right. And keep in mind something, over the course of time, you're fighting an opponent who's seeing what you're doing, and you're doing things right. So in a football game, you can either run the ball or pass the ball. So you come out the first half and you run the first 11 games, and you run, and you win all these games because you can run the football really well, and nobody can stop you from running the football. 12th game comes and the other team says, we're going to put everybody up front and stop the run, and you're going to pass it. And you try to run the ball and you lose it. You lose that game. Well, it's because they found a weakness that, hey, if we can stop to put all these people up front and stop the run, then you're not going to be able to beat us passing, or you're not prepared to do that. That's what it is. They looked at part of it is they looked at it and they're saying the Russians are taking all this ground. But once they take it, they're leaving lightly armored troops in. They're not preparing it for a counteroffensive. For the most part, they're leaving some areas where there's not enough people, there's not enough troops, there's not enough armor, there's not enough protection. We can hit those. And they hit them in the Kherson region, but still it wasn't enough. And they lost enough. They lost so many troops that they couldn't continue that offense. They tried it in another area. They had some success. And I suspect more that now that they've had some success doing something, I expect them to go to other areas and say, let's throw 100,000 of these poor bastards into the heart of this artillery and see if enough of them can come out on the other side to take a couple towns. So will it be the only victory the Ukrainians get? Probably not. Maybe not. I don't know. But I think the Russians are going to regroup some areas. And I think the Russians are going to make a few changes, odds and ends here. Even if they didn't make changes, I think they're still on course to win the world war. Because if you got air domination, it's hard to win a war when the other side has air domination. So they will continue. And the bottom line is they're taking horrific losses, and no army can continue to do that and, fight for a long time. And then let's go to the other part of it. And that is, and here galloping towards us on his snowy white steed is General Winter leading the charge into the EU. You see, because there are two battles. There's the battle on the ground in Ukraine, and then there are the rest of the battles everywhere worldwide against Russia. The US and NATO have gone on a worldwide battle against Russia. Now, I am hearing, don't know how true it is, I'm hearing some rumors, and you may have heard them too, that Russia and the EU are starting to say to Ukraine, hey, perhaps we should start to talk about some kind of you should start to talk to Russia about some kind of a deal. Right now, I don't know if it's true, putting it out there. It would make sense if it is. It would make sense for this reason. If you are NATO, if you're the EU, and you feel like you're going to eventually need a deal with Russia, right? You would want to do it when you had some level of wins. From the perspective of negotiating, you always want to negotiate from a position of power. When you lost every single battle, why does Russia need to negotiate? They got no reason to negotiate. They're winning. You're laying on the ground, and I got my, people who what's interesting is people who are not trained to fight, right? They want to do the same thing. They all want to grab somebody, throw them on the ground, pin them down with their knees, and pummel their head. That's all they want to do. That's what they want to do. And you know that a person who's attacking you, that is their ultimate goal. You can use that against them because you know what they're doing and what they're going to try to do. And you can use that against you as a defense. I already know your game plan. I'm going to use that as a defense against you. I'm going to be prepped for that, right? Well, when you want to negotiate, when the guy's down on the ground and you got his knees pinned and you're about to beat him in the face, you say it's time to talk. Why? Because he's going to give you everything you need. You don't want to negotiate when it's the other way around, right? So it's been the other way around. So now, sure, I mean, I'm not implying that NATO has the upper hand. They certainly don't. But they finally got something that they can interpret as a victory. So therefore, if they're going to negotiate, this would be the time. Now, that ain't saying Russia's going to be ready to negotiate, because I don't think they are. But if I'm Russia, I say no. I'm going to wait. Hold on a minute. Hold my beer. I'm going to negotiate. You ready to negotiate? We're always ready to negotiate. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to do this counteroffensive. We're going to punch the hell out of you. We're going to bomb the hell out of you. We're going to make you feel some pain. Then we're ready to negotiate. When you want to negotiate is when you got the upper hand. When you at least got some, and from the perspective of NATO, you're not going to get the upper hand in Ukraine, but at least from the perspective of when you got some victories. Now, let me add this. Old man Winter, General Winter, is galloping on his white steed into Europe. The other part of it is this: Russia ain't got to do nothing. They can sit. They got a General Winter coming in. This is their great, the Russia always, no matter what war they're in, eventually they sit back and let General Winter come in and get his work done. And he's heading in to get his work done in Europe. and elsewhere. And what we're looking at in Europe is complete and total, utter disaster, destruction. If Russia does nothing but holds out and keeps this war going, and they're getting victories, and they're going to, let's face it, it's been a lopsided blowout beyond belief so far. So if they maintain course and speed, and they say we've had we've had some losses here, but we're going to go back and counter-offend and kick ass and take names, right? They got time to do that. They could say, okay, they're in there, we're going to make our move. They got time. We're going to, in a month, a week, 2 weeks, whatever, we're going to make our move. They got time. European doesn't have time. Time is not on their side. So the Russians have time and weather on their side. So what is going to happen is, and the other part of it is, as the weather gets worse and the ground gets soggy and it's harder to move, that means troops are going to be dug in more. They're going to be sitting still more. Who is going to suffer more if troops have to be dug in and sit still? The side that does not have aerospace advantage. Because once troops are dug in and you can't move a lot of armor and stuff like that, and you have to sit still, number one, your supply lines still have to move in bad weather and bad dirt and all that, which means you don't have aerospace advantage. They're going to get hit. You're going to have trouble getting resupplied, big trouble getting resupplied. And they can, so I just don't see it in the stars for Ukraine, other than, they took a little bit of ground here and there in the long run. Looking at this thing in the long run, I don't see how far they go with that. The other part I would have to say is that the protests in Europe, as is easily predicted, as predicted by me, you, everyone here, let's face it, if you're watching this, you have a pretty good idea what the hell's going on, and you're not some kind of a puppet bot, most likely. So you're looking at it and you're saying, human beings are not going to accept their own governments betraying them to the level that the governments are betraying the people of the EU. So we're starting to see more things fire up in the EU. It started, the European people are asking nicely. They've started asking nicely. It ain't gonna last but so long. The perfect example is Prague, where the protesters gave the government until the 25th of September to quit, to sign out, to call it quits. And that ain't happening, because the president of Czechoslovakia said, oh, they're a bunch of Russian loving, Russian hugging bots. This is all about Putin. Well, he can say that all he wants to. Come September 25th, he gonna have a problem. And if they allow this to go to, if they allow this economic disaster, this economic meltdown to run its natural course, then what they will have is a situation so dire and so dystopian that it'll turn extremely violent. Now, the German government and other governments have said, well, we expect violent protest. No, you're not talking about violent protest here. You're talking about people going into the buildings, taking government officials out, and we'll just leave it there. Going into the buildings, once people start breaking down the doors and going into buildings and putting physical hands on government officials, I think historically we know the results of those kind of actions. And if the people are, if the situation is allowed to continue on its natural course right now, we know what's going to happen. We know that there will be deaths as a result of, there will be literally, I would guess, thousands and thousands of deaths. We know it will be a complete destabilization of the European continent economically and socially, and which means politically. The people, we've already started seeing farmers. So the Europeans right now, they got a plan, and it ain't a good one. Right now, their plan is to make sure that nobody can see the protests on television. That's their plan right now, it appears to be. All they're doing is, I was, the other day, I was searching online for the protests in Germany, couldn't find them anywhere. Couldn't find it in the news, couldn't find it anywhere. In fact, when you search, you get the opposite. When you search like protests in Germany or something like that, it'll be like Putin's evil, Ukraine wins. They'll get all that. They've set these algorithms up so that you can't really search for news. You have to go on Telegram, you have to go on Twitter and search and look and go to various sources to find out what's really going on. And what we found is there are protests starting in Germany. It ain't going to get better for them. So realistically, the Russians have two things on their side. Number one is that they have a superior firepower, and they have aeronautic advantages. One could or almost use the term supremacy in Ukraine. So they're going to win that. They're going to win that. Could they take some punches? Could they take a bloody nose here and there? Sure. Yeah, I mean, we're not talking about the military of Morocco. We're talking about the most powerful military in NATO and in Europe right now by exponential margin. Let's face it. The Brits they got a handful of hooligans that'd be lucky to turn over a dustbin in Shropshire. Those people ain't beating nobody. The Germans, the French are the only ones that have any kind of a military at all. The Germans got nothing. So in reality, you look around, there is no NATO military that's going to challenge Russia, right? There's no powerful military in NATO. Right now, you got the U.S., you got Turkey. Turkey ain't going to war with Russia. You got France; they got somewhat of a military. So realistically, but there are a lot of French people who are very pro-Russian, and it would be hard to muster France to say, yeah, let's just go to war with Russia. You'd have a lot of problems at home. So I say all that to say this: either one of two things happens. Europe is on course for economic meltdown, complete and not temporary. Not, hey, we're going to have a bad winter. Think about this. The argument that Russia is going to have a bad winter, that Europe is going to have a bad winter implies some kind of mitigating factors after the winter. It's like, after the winter, boy, we could have a bad winter. Now, after that, we're on our way. No, a bad winter would mean simply the difference between the bad winter and the bad spring would be a lot of people would freeze to death, would be death, massive death from the elements, right? But would that change the fact that all of their factories were shut down? Would that change the fact that not only were all their factories shut down, that all of their means of transportation have shut down? So now you don't have factories running. You don't have ways to move your food and products around, right? Who's buying a Mercedes or BMW? Or Porsche, Audi, who's buying any of that crap? You don't have no idea if you're going to be able to get parts for it. Who's buying Bosch? Who's buying Siemens? Who's buying stuff from them? Who's buying stuff from any of those countries when they're so unstable that you don't know if you'll be able to get parts for the stuff you buy? So for starters, the industries won't be able to run because they won't have the energy to run. But two, nobody in their right mind outside of Europe is going to buy that stuff because you're not going to be able to get any service for it. You're not going to be able to get parts and the things that you need. So what happens? Well, you can't, we're always splitting things up in our mind. We're always using words to split things up. So we split the year. There's a year. We split it up with words. Autumn, fall, spring, winter, summer, right? But in reality, there's nothing split. It's not like the day that there's like the winter comes, people freeze, everything goes to hell, everything closes down, pipes burst, on and on and on. It's not like as soon as the first day it gets 60 degrees in Europe that all will be joy in the spot and all will be well. No, once it gets warm, the thing about it is this: the winter, people will be too damn cold and trying to survive to get out in the streets. Oh, once it gets warm, they're coming out with clubs and pitchforks and they're looking for some heads to roll. And I don't mean that metaphorically. If you remember the French Revolution, it ain't going to be metaphorically that whole heads to roll. It will not be figuratively a speech to say heads to roll. So when it comes to that, and the European people will be able to they'll be able to go online and see, damn, the Russians got food. The Russians got energy. The Russians are warm. The Russian economy is still moving along. Don't get me wrong. Russia, China, all of these other economies do believe in I mean, they do count on the European sales, so it's going to hurt of the U.S. It's going to hurt these other countries that buy and sell and do business with the EU, but it ain't going to hurt them as bad. It's going to hurt the EU, and the U.S. will be sitting there, and ultimately, this is what you get. I'm going to end up with this. This is what you get. The U.S. is like upset. Three different. I'm doing like there used to be a show called Martin, and there was a guy that would always say, "Broad man from the fifth floor," and he would always hold up four fingers, right? So I'll say three. There's three threats to the U.S. hegemony. China, from the mind of the neocons. China, Russia, the EU, right? Well, that'll mean that to the US neocons, it'll mean, well, we took one down, two to go. That's the only way that, and it's sad because a lot of people on this side of the pond see it and know it, and they're like, boy, it sucks to be the Europeans. But the Europeans are, still a bunch of those. A certain element in Europe is still running around flying a bunch of damn blue and yellow flags, not realizing that their ass is being thrown to the wolves. They're thrown to the economic wood chipper. But a lot of people on this side of the pond can see it very, very clearly. And I think more people on the other side can see it too, and realize that what we're looking at is a circumstance where the U.S. sees three economic peers, and it would like to eliminate all three as a threat. And in this instance, the idea was to eliminate two out of three. See, people are like, well, they screwed up because they wanted China. No. And they got caught up in China. You missed something. There are three threats to U.S. economic hegemony. And let's not forget, Macron and some of the people there were saying, we need an EU army. That sealed your doom. When the neocons heard you say, we want an EU army, they're like, holy shit, Russia will have an army, China will have an army, the EU will have an army. We can't have that shit. When Macron said that, that's when they sealed their own doom. The only difference being is if the U.S. says to China, we want you to destroy your economy, China's going to be like, yeah, sure. Russia, we'd like you to destroy your economy. Russia's going to be like, get the fuck out of here. We're going to kick your ass in Ukraine. Come on, let's do it. Let's dance. And then the U.S. says to those ignorant fucks that are running Europe, hey, we want you to destroy your own economy. Von der Leyen and Schultz and these, oh boy, and now they've got a real intellectual powerhouse in Liz Truss. They're going to be like, oh, what? Destroy our own economy, kill our own people, destroy and wipe out everything that we've spent centuries working for. Well, we do have a culture too. You might want to destroy that. Sure, not a problem. Yes, master. Anything else? That's the difference. Russia and China ain't stupid enough to wipe out their own economy. The Europeans leaders are voluntarily saying, out of the three powerful economic threats to U.S. hegemony, one of them, the leaders are so damn stupid, and might I add, and they're actually part. I hate bad news for you, Europe. You think they're your leaders. They're part of the team. They're part of the U.S. foggy bottom State Department neocon team. They ain't your leaders, and they ain't on your side. And if they were, they wouldn't be doing this. So now the economic meltdown in Europe is done. The question is, in the same way that Russia's going to reconstitute itself, it took some losses and it's going to reconstitute itself, and I expect counteroffensive. What will the counteroffensive, whether it's protests, whatever it is going to be, by the European people? That's the question. How are they going to deal with this? How are they going to put up with this? And I wonder, I find it hard to believe, but I wonder if the leaders, the neocons, if they're starting to say, we got to strike a deal because this is going to go bad for us. They probably won't, because neocons do what neocons do. All right, let me check. We got some Sparky. We can always count on Germans love forests, but they may need firewood. Yeah, they're totally screwed unless they can eat firewood. Protests now are covered less than yellow vests. Quite simple. You're right, Sparky, 100%. They just, the way to make protests go away. No, there's no problems here. Why? Because I don't see them. I don't see any problems. There's no problems. Can't see any problems. Look, no problems. That's the way of doing it. It's all about the information war. Let me continue. Curtis Mitchell says, "Love your common sense analysis always." Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. That's because I'm not all really smart, so I have to, just gotta read some stuff and keep it make it simple. What time do you and Wilmer actually do your show? I figured you guys would take calls if it was live. No, it's not live. We actually, thanks Torches and Pitchforks, the Critical Hour. We actually every day between 1 and 3:40 p.m. we record it. I do my Pacifica show on KPFK every Monday. I do that live. My Pacifica show in KPFK in Los Angeles. My Pacifica show on WPFW in Washington, D.C. I do that live. The rest of all of the Sputnik stuff is recorded. Oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Raphael Lagandi says Putin starts to look like a clown more and more. Well, it's certainly welcome. I'm glad. You know what I say? I'm glad we have some people in here to disagree with me. Always like to have a healthy society is one where people say, I disagree. And someone says, thank you for your comment. So, Raphael, thank you for your comment. I certainly appreciate it. I am not opposed to alternative perspectives. If you believe Putin looks like a clown, then certainly you should say it. The U.S. is an empire of evil. I thought it was called the Empire of Lies. Everybody out there should read the Empire of Lies speech. And I think that's it. And thanks a lot, James Boyajan. Thank you, everyone. I certainly appreciate it. At Garland Nixon on Twitter, Garland.Nixon on Instagram, just plain old Garland Nixon on Facebook. Please, you can help support the channel. You can see everything scrolling across patreon.com/Garland Nixon. If you can do $3, $5, however many dollars you can do, it's great. Or buymeacoffee.com/Garland NH. And buy me a coffee. You can do, one-time, one-time donations. Cash App is $ DC Radio Man. Everybody, smash the like button, please. Every single person. We got 285 people. I should have 285 likes. I would appreciate that from everybody. And everyone, please go to my Rockfin channel, rockfin.com, ROKFIN.com/Garland Nixon. It is imperative that you go there and become a member. The reason being that if they toss me off of YouTube or anywhere else, I'll still have my Rockfin show. Thank you, everyone. Peace. I am out.